Hello and welcome to another episode of Mike Reads. A special welcome to those of you coming from the Captain Phoenix channel. Welcome to the Mike Reads channel. Tonight we're going to be doing an excerpt from F.A. Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. We're going to be reading chapter 11. And the reason we're going to do this, and I'm going to try to make this video pertinent to both the Mike Reads channel and to the Captain Phoenix channels, is because I just finished up my review of this book after I finished reading the whole thing. And Chapter 11 is so poignant and I think so important to the conversation that's going on today and in today's society that I think it is actually applicable to both the Mike Reads channel and the Captain Phoenix channel. So thanks to everyone for joining in, and I hope you enjoy. I'm going to go ahead and dive right on into Chapter 11. If you want my review of the book, I'll post a link to that video in this video's description. I won't be reading the whole book right this moment, so we're going to just be doing this one excerpt and then moving on to our next read. So without further ado, Chapter 11, The End of Truth. Quote, "It is significant that the nationalization of thought has proceeded everywhere pari passu with the nationalization of industry." End quote. E.H. Carr. The most effective way of making everybody serve the single system of ends towards which the social plan is directed is to make everybody believe in those ends. To make a totalitarian system function efficiently, it is not enough that everybody should be forced to work for the same ends. It is essential that the people should come to regard them as their own ends. Although the beliefs must be chosen for the people and imposed upon them, they must become their beliefs. A generally accepted creed which makes the individuals as far as possible act spontaneously in the way the planner wants. If the feeling of oppression in totalitarian countries is in general much less acute than most people in liberal countries imagine, this is because the totalitarian governments succeed to a high degree in making people think as they want them to. This is, of course, brought about by the various forms of propaganda. Its technique is now so familiar that we need say little about it. The only point that needs to be stressed is that neither propaganda in itself nor the techniques employed are peculiar to totalitarianism, and that what so completely changes its nature and effect in a totalitarian state is that all propaganda serves the same goal, that all the instruments of propaganda are coordinated to influence the individuals in the same direction and to produce the characteristic Gleichschaltung of all minds. As a result, the effect of propaganda in totalitarian countries is different not only in magnitude, but in kind from that of the propaganda made for different ends by independent and competing agencies. If all the sources of current information are effectively under one single control, it is no longer a question of merely persuading the people of this or that. The skillful propagandist then has power to mold their minds in any direction he chooses, and even the most intelligent and independent people cannot entirely escape that influence if they are long isolated from all other sources of information. While in the totalitarian states this status of propaganda gives it a unique power over the minds of the people, the peculiar moral effects arise not from the technique but from the object and scope of totalitarian propaganda. If it could be confined to indoctrinating the people with this whole system of values toward which the social effort is directed, propaganda would represent merely a particular manifestation of the characteristic features of collectivist morals which we have already considered. If its object were merely to teach the people a definite and comprehensive moral code, the problem would be solely whether this moral code is good or bad. We have seen that the moral code of a totalitarian society is not likely to appeal to us, that even the striving for equality by means of a directed economy can result only in an officially enforced inequality, an authoritarian determination of the status of each individual in the new hierarchical order, and that most of the humanitarian elements of our morals, the respect for human life, for the weak, and for the individual generally, will disappear. However repellent this may be to most people, and though it involves a change in moral standards, it is not necessarily entirely anti-moral. Some features of such a system may even appeal to the sternest moralist of a conservative tint and seem to them preferable to the softer standards of a liberal society. The moral consequences of totalitarian propaganda which we must now consider are, however, of an even more profound kind. They are destructive of all morals because they undermine one of the foundations of all morals, the sense of and the respect for truth. From the nature of its task, totalitarian propaganda cannot confine itself to values, to questions of opinion and moral convictions in which the individual always will conform, more or less, to the views ruling his community, but must extend to the questions of fact, where human intelligence is involved in a different way. This is so, first, because in order to induce people to accept the official values, these must be justified or shown to be connected with the values already held by the people, which usually will involve assertions about causal connections between means and ends. And, second, because the distinction between ends and means, between the goal aimed at and the measures taken to achieve it, is in fact never so clear-cut and definite as any general discussion of these problems is likely to suggest, and because, therefore, people must be brought to agree not only with the ultimate aims, but also with the views about the facts and possibilities on which the particular measures are based. We have seen that agreement on the complete ethical code, that all-comprehensive system of values which is implicit in an economic plan, does not exist in a free society, but would have to be created. But we must not assume that the planner will approach his task aware of that need, or that, even if he were aware of it, it would be possible to create such a comprehensive code in advance. He only finds out about the conflicts between different needs as he goes along, and he has to make his decisions as the necessity arises. The code of values guiding his decision does not exist in abstracto before the decisions have to be made. It has to be created with the particular decisions. We have also seen how this inability to separate the general problem of values from the particular decisions makes it impossible that a democratic body, while unable to decide the technical details of a plan, should yet determine the values guiding it. And while the planning authority will constantly have to decide issues on merits about which there exist no definite moral rules, it will have to justify its decisions to the people, or, at least, have somehow to make the people believe that they are the right decisions. Although those responsible for a decision may have been guided by no more than prejudice, some guiding principle will have to be stated publicly if the community is not merely passively to submit, but actively to support the measure. The need to rationalize the likes and dislikes, which, for lack of anything else, must guide the planner in many of his decisions, and the necessity of stating his reasons in a form in which they will appeal to as many people as possible, will force him to construct theories, i.e., assertions about the connections between facts, which then become an integral part of the governing doctrine. This process of creating a myth to justify his action need not be conscious. The totalitarian leader may be guided merely by an instinctive dislike of the state of things he has found and a desire to create a new hierarchical order which conforms better to his conception of merit. He may merely know that he dislikes the Jew who seemed to be so successful in an order which did not provide a satisfactory place for him, and that he loves and admires the tall blonde man, the aristocratic figure of the novels of his youth. So he will readily embrace theories which seem to provide a rational justification for the prejudices which he shares with many of his fellows. Thus a pseudoscientific theory becomes part of the official creed which to a greater or lesser degree directs everybody's action. Or the widespread dislike of the industrial civilization and a romantic yearning for country life, together with a, probably erroneous, idea about the special value of country people as soldiers, provide the basis for another myth, Blut und Boden, which means blood and soil in English, expressing not merely ultimate values, but a whole host of beliefs about cause and effect which, once they have become ideals directing the activity of the whole community, must not be questioned. The need for such official doctrines as an instrument of directing and rallying the efforts of the people has been clearly foreseen by the various theoreticians of the totalitarian system. Plato's noble lies and Sorel's myths serve the same purpose as the radical doctrine of the Nazis or the theory of the corporate state of Mussolini. They are all necessarily based on particular views about facts, which are then elaborated into scientific theories in order to justify a preconceived opinion. The most effective way of making people accept the validity of the values they are to serve is to persuade them that they are really the same as those which they, or at least the best among them, have always held, but which were not properly understood or recognized before. The people are made to transfer their allegiance from the old gods to the new under the pretense that the new gods really are what their sound instinct had always told them, but what before they had only dimly seen. And the most efficient technique to this end is to use the old words, but change their meaning. Few traits of totalitarian regimes are at the same time so confusing to the superficial observer, and yet so characteristic of the whole intellectual climate as the complete perversion of language, the change of meaning of words by which the ideals of the new regimes are expressed. The worst sufferer in this respect is, of course, the word liberty. It is a word used as freely in totalitarian states as elsewhere. Indeed, it could almost be said, and it should serve as a warning to us to be on our guard against all the tempters who promise us the new liberties for old, that wherever liberty as we understand it has been destroyed, this has always been done in the name of some new freedom promised to the people. Even among us we have, quote, planners for freedom, end quote, who promise us a, quote, collective freedom for the group, end quote, the nature of which may be gathered from the fact that its advocate finds it necessary to assure us that, quote, naturally the advent of planned freedom does not mean that all, earlier forms of freedom must be abolished, end quote. Dr. Karl Mannheim, from whose work these sentences are taken, at least warns us that, quote, a conception of freedom modeled on the preceding age is an obstacle to any real understanding of the problem, end quote. But his use of the word freedom is as misleading as it is in the mouth of the totalitarian politicians. Like their freedom, the collective freedom he offers us is not the freedom of the members of society, but the unlimited freedom of the planner to do with society what he pleases. It is the confusion of freedom with power carried to the extreme. In this particular case, the perversion of the meaning of the word has, of course, been well prepared by a long line of German philosophers, and, not least, by many of the theoreticians of socialism. But freedom, or liberty, are by no means the only words whose meaning has been changed into their opposites to make them serve as instruments of totalitarian propaganda. We have already seen how the same happens to justice and law, right, and equality. The list could be extended until it includes almost all moral and political terms in general use. If one has not oneself experienced this process, it is difficult to appreciate the magnitude of this change of the meaning of words, the confusion which it causes, and the barriers to any rational discussion which it creates. It has to be seen to be understood how, if one of two brothers embraces the new faith, after a short while he appears to speak a different language, which makes any real communication between them impossible. And the confusion becomes worse because this change of meaning of the words describing political ideals is not a single event but a continuous process, a technique employed consciously or unconsciously to direct the people. Gradually, as this process continues, the whole language becomes despoiled, and words become empty shells deprived of any definite meaning, as capable of denoting one thing as its opposite and used solely for the emotional associations which still adhere to them. It is not difficult to deprive the great majority of independent thought. But the minority who will retain an inclination to criticize must also be silenced. We have already seen why coercion cannot be confined to the acceptance of the ethical code underlying the plan according to which all social activity is directed. Since many parts of this code will never be explicitly stated, since many parts of this guiding scale of values will exist only implicitly in the plan itself in every detail, in fact every act of the government, must become sacrosanct and exempt from criticism. If the people are to support the common effort without hesitation, they must be convinced that not only the end aimed at, but also the means are chosen to the right ones. The official creed, to which adherence must be enforced, will therefore compromise all the views about facts on which the plan is based. Public criticism or even expressions of doubt must be suppressed because they tend to weaken public spirit. As the Webb's report of the position in every Russian enterprise, quote, "Whilst the work is in progress, any public expression of doubt, or even fear that the plan will not be successful, is an act of disloyalty and even of treachery because of its possible effects on the will and on the efforts of the rest of the staff." End quote. When the doubt or fear expressed concerns not the success of a particular enterprise, but of the whole social plan, it must be treated even more as sabotage. Just briefly an aside, this book was written by F.A. Hayek in the middle of World War II between 1943 and 1946. Facts and theories must thus become no less the object of an official doctrine than views about values. And the whole apparatus for spreading knowledge, the schools and the press, radio and motion picture, will be used exclusively to spread those views which, whether true or false, will strengthen the belief in the rightness of the decision taken by the authority, and all information that might cause doubt or hesitation will be withheld. The probable effect on the people's loyalty to the system becomes the only criterion for deciding whether a particular piece of information is to be published or suppressed. The situation in a totalitarian state is permanently and in all fields the same that it is elsewhere in some fields in wartime. Everything which might cause doubt about the wisdom of the government or create discontent will be kept from the people. The basis of unfavorable comparisons with conditions elsewhere, the knowledge of possible alternatives to the course action taken, information which might suggest failure on the part of the government to live up to its promises or to take the advantage of opportunities to improve conditions, all will be suppressed. There is consequently no field where the systematic control of information will be not practiced and uniformity of views not enforced. This applies even to fields apparently most remote from any political interests, and particularly to all the sciences, even the most abstract. That in the disciplines dealing directly with human affairs and therefore most immediately affecting political views, such as history, law, or economics, the disinterested search for truth cannot be allowed in a totalitarian system, and the vindication of the official views becomes the sole object, is easily seen and has been amply confirmed by experience. These disciplines have, indeed, in all totalitarian countries become the most fertile factories of the official myths which the rulers use to guide the minds and wills of their subjects. It is not surprising that in these spheres even the pretense that they search for truth is abandoned, and that the authorities decide what doctrines ought to be taught and published. Totalitarian control of opinion extends, however, also to subjects which at first seem to have no political significance. Sometimes it is difficult to explain why particular doctrines should be officially prescribed, or why others should be encouraged, and it is curious that these likes and dislikes are apparently somewhat similar in the different totalitarian systems. In particular, they all seem to have in common an intense dislike of the more abstract forms of thought, a dislike characteristically also shown by many of the collectivists among our scientists. Whether the theory of relativity is represented as a, quote, Semitic attack on the foundation of Christians in Nordic physics, end quote, or opposed because it is, quote, in conflict with the dialectical materialism in Marxist dogma, end quote, comes very much to the same thing. Nor does it make much difference whether certain theorems of mathematical statistics are attacked because they, quote, form part of the class struggle on the ideological frontier and are a product of the historical role of mathematics as the servant of the bourgeoisie, end quote, or whether the whole subject is condemned because, quote, it provides no guarantee that it will serve the interest of the people, end quote. It seems that pure mathematics is no less a victim, and that even the holding of particular views about the nature of continuity can be ascribed to, quote, bourgeois prejudices, end quote. According to the Webbs, the Journal for Marxist-Leninist Natural Sciences has the following slogans, quote, we stand for party in mathematics. We stand for the purity of Marxist-Leninist theory in surgery, end quote. The situation seems to be very similar in Germany. The Germany of National Socialist Association of Mathematics is full of, quote, party in mathematics, end quote, and one of the best-known German physicists, the Nobel Prizeman Leonard, has summed up his life work under the title German Physics in 4 volumes. It is entirely in keeping with the whole spirit of totalitarianism that it condemns any human activity done for its own sake and without ulterior purpose. Science for science sake, art for art's sake, are equally abhorrent to the Nazis, our socialist intellectuals, and the communists. Every activity must derive its justification from a conscious social purpose. There must be no spontaneous, unguided activity, because it must produce the results which cannot be foreseen and for which the plan does not provide. It might produce something new, undreamed of in the philosophy of the planner. The principle extends even to games and amusements. I leave it to the reader to guess whether it was in Germany or in Russia that chess players were officially exhorted that, quote, we must finish once and for all with the neutrality of chess. We must condemn once and for all the formula chess for the sake of chess, like the formula art for art's sake, end quote. Incredible as some of these aberrations may appear, we must yet be on our guard not to dismiss them as mere accidental byproducts which have nothing to do with the essential character of a planned or totalitarian system. They are not. They are a direct result of that same desire to see everything directed by a, quote, unitary conception of the whole, end quote, of the need to uphold at all costs the views in the service of which people are asked to make constant sacrifices, and of the general idea that the knowledge and beliefs of the people are an instrument to be used for a single purpose. Once science has to serve not truth, but the interests of a class, a community, or a state, the sole task of argument and discussion is to vindicate and to spread still further the beliefs by which the whole life of the community is directed. As the Nazi Minister of Justice has explained, the question which every new scientific theory must ask itself is, quote, do I serve National Socialism for the greatest benefit of all, end quote. The word truth itself ceases to have its old meaning. It describes no longer something to be found, with the individual conscience as the sole arbiter of whether in any particular instance the evidence, or the standing of those proclaiming it, warrants a belief. It becomes something to be laid down by authority, something which has to be believed in the interest of the unity of the organized effort, and which may have to be altered as the exigencies of this organized effort require it. The general intellectual climate which this produces, the spirit of complete cynicism as regards truth which it engenders, the loss of the sense of even the meaning of truth, the disappearance of the spirit of independent inquiry, and of the belief in the power of rational conviction, the way in which differences of opinion in every branch of knowledge become political issues to be decided by authority, are all things which one must personally experience. No short description can convey their extent. Perhaps the most alarming fact is that contempt for intellectual liberty is not a thing which arises only once the totalitarian system is established, but one which can be found everywhere among intellectuals who have embraced a collectivist faith and who are acclaimed as intellectual leaders even in countries still under a liberal regime. Not only is even the worst oppression condoned if it is committed in the name of socialism, and the creation of a totalitarian system openly advocated by people who pretend to speak for the scientists of liberal countries, intolerance, too, is openly extolled. Have we not recently seen a British scientific writer defend even Inquisition because in his opinion it, quote, is beneficial to science when it protects a rising class, end quote? This view is, of course, practically indistinguishable from the views which led the Nazis to the persecution of men of science, the burning of scientific books, and the systematic eradication of the intelligentsia of the subjected people. The desire to force upon the people a creed which is regarded as salutary for them is, of course, not a thing that is new or peculiar to our time. New, however, is the argument by which many of our intellectuals try to justify such attempts. There is no real freedom of thought in our society, so it is said, because the opinions and tastes of the masses are shaped by propaganda, by advertising, by the example of the upper classes, and by other environmental factors which inevitably force the thinking of the people into well-worn grooves. From this it is concluded that if the ideals and tastes of the great majority are always fashioned by circumstances which we can control, we ought to use this power deliberately to turn the thoughts of the people in what we think is a desirable direction. Probably it is true enough that the great majority are rarely capable of thinking independently, that on most questions they accept views which they find ready-made, and that they will be equally content if born or coaxed into one set of beliefs or another. In any society, freedom of thought will probably be of direct significance only for a small minority. But this does not mean that anyone is competent or ought to have power to select those to whom this freedom is to be reserved. It certainly does not justify the presumption of any group of people to claim the right to determine what people ought to think or believe. It shows a complete confusion of thought to suggest that because under any sort of system the majority of people follow the lead of somebody, it makes no difference if everybody has to follow the same lead. To deprecate the value of intellectual freedom because it will never mean for everybody the same possibility of independent thought is completely to miss the reasons which give intellectual freedom its value. What is essential to make it serve its function as a prime mover of intellectual progress is not that everybody may be able to think or write anything, but that any cause or idea may be argued by somebody. So long as dissent is not suppressed, there will always be some who will query the ideas ruling their contemporaries and put new ideas to the test of argument and propaganda. This interaction of individuals possessing different knowledge and different views is what constitutes the life of thought. The growth of reason is a social process based on the existence of such differences. It is of its essence that its results cannot be predicted, that we cannot know which views will assist this growth and which will not. In short, that this growth cannot be governed by any views which we now possess without at the same time limiting it. To plan, or organize, the growth of mind, or, for that matter, progress in general, is a contradiction in terms. The idea that the human mind ought consciously to control its own development confuses individual reason, which alone can consciously control anything, with the interpersonal process to which its growth is due. By attempting to control it, we are merely setting bounds to its development, and must sooner or later produce a stagnation of thought and a decline of reason. The tragedy of collectivist thought is that, while it starts out to make reason supreme, it ends by destroying reason because it misconceives the process on which the growth of reason depends. It may indeed be said that it is the paradox of all collectivist doctrine and its demand for conscious control or conscious planning that they necessarily lead to the demand that the mind of some individual should rule supreme, while only the individualist approach to social phenomena makes us recognize the super-individual forces which guide the growth of reason. Individualism is thus an attitude of humility before this social process, and of tolerance to other opinions, and is the exact opposite of that intellectual hubris which is at the root of the demand for comprehensive direction of the social process. Well, that concludes Chapter 11. Thanks for sticking around for this excerpt. Welcome to my channel if you come here from the Captain Phoenix channel. And, we got a lot more reads for you. You can look through our videos. You can see how we've gotten into some Thomas Sowell and some Adam Smith. And I've got some other reviews that you can check out too. I hope you found this excerpt as poignant and applicable to today's conversation as I found it. And I hope that you've all taken it to heart. And again, finally, thanks for sticking around. And I'll see you in the next video. And until then, this has been Mike, signing off.